Madhava, or is just go
Yes,
right into the
yes.
class?
Yes, you can definitely do that, Prabhu. Okay, I think we just went live on Facebook. Let me check. Okay, I think we are live. So Hare Krishna, everybody. Thank you all. So today is the last day of January. So 1 month is over in 2021, and we are very fortunate to have His Grace Kalakantha Prabhu, who is a senior disciple of Srila Prabhupada. So we are very thankful to him for giving his time. Just to give few words about Prabhuji, he has served as a temple president, ISKCON Gainesville, for almost a decade or even more than a decade. And he's a wonderful preacher and very unique in his way of sharing Krishna consciousness with people, and especially with the youth. And we all know that the Krishna Gainesville is such a wonderful example, and they do excellent lunch program every day in the University of Florida, and serving almost I don't know 800 900 maybe every day. So, and Prabhu is also exemplary grihastha, and he's also initiating guru in ISKCON, and he's also a very well known scholar, writer, and poet, and he's also a poet, and he has authored many books. And just to name some of them, some of the poetic renditions of Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, and another topic is All the Lies in Between, Rap of God, The Saint with an Saint within, and God with dance. So I would definitely recommend every one of you who are on the Facebook and Zoom. Please do try to find those books. Probably they might be available on online. Probably, if I'm right,
Yes, some from Amazon. Yes.
Amazon. I'm sure you can find them. So without further delay, Prabhu, thank you so much for your time. Please lead us from here.
Thank you, Prabhu. Hare Krishna. Welcome, everyone. It's good to be here with you, the devotees in ISKCON Orlando. Um, the topic this morning is happiness and Krishna consciousness. So we'll be reading a very nice verse from the Bhagavad Gita on this point. And I'd like to just start with a little hand clapping kirtan, so everybody could be muted and please chant along. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Ballabha Giri Varadhari.
Kunja Bihari.
Please mute, everybody. Yes, please mute.
Okay.
Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Ballabha Giri Varadhari. Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Jamuna Tirambanachari Jamuna Tirambanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Ballabha Giri Varadhari. Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Jamuna Tirambanachari Jamuna Tirambanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Janabala Bagiri Varadhari. Gaur Premanandi Haribo. Haribo. Excuse me just a moment while I open a window. I'll be right with you.
Sure, Prabhuji.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So this morning I'd like to discuss this subject of happiness. Once Srila Prabhupada was giving a lecture and a challenging student asked him, "Are you happy?" And Prabhupada responded, "If I tell you, will you believe me?" So it was a very nice response, because what is the student going to say? "No, I won't believe you." Well, then what's the point in answering? So he said yes. And Prabhupada said, "Yes." So we were happy in Krishna consciousness. But it is a happiness that is experienced only by those who are practicing bhakti. Therefore, it is unknown or not understandable to most people. So we're going to delve into a little bit of that this morning, not only what that happiness is, but the basis of it, and also what it means if we are experiencing a lack of happiness in our spiritual life. What can be the causes of that? So first, let's begin with the Gita statement on happiness. I believe I'm able to share my screen here. So, okay, oops. Okay,
Yes,
bear with me.
Prabhuji, you can share.
I can share, okay. There we go. Okay, this is chapter 9 from the Gita, verse number 2. Rajavidya Rajaguyam Pavitram Idam Uttamam Pratyaksavagamam Dharmyam Shushukam Kartumavyayam. Let's all chant together. Rajavidya Rajaguhyam Pavitram Idam Uttamam Pratyaksavagamam Dharmyam Susukham Kartumavyayam. Rajavidya is the king of education, Rajaguyam, the king of confidential knowledge, Pavitram, the purest, Idam, this, Uttamam, transcendental, Pratyaksha, by direct experience, Avagamam, understood, Dharmyam, principle of religion, Susukam, very happiness, Kartum, to execute, and Avyayam, everlasting. Let's read the translation together, please. This knowledge is the king of education, the most secret of all secrets. It is the purest knowledge, and because it gives direct perception of the self by realization, it is the perfection of religion. It is everlasting, and it is joyfully performed. I'd like to ask for a helper if somebody would be willing to read the purport. It's a fairly lengthy purport, but after each paragraph or two, I could make a comment. Anyone be able to help me by reading?
Sure.
Aritra Prabhu, can you try?
Okay, sure. Purport by His Divine Grace, Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada today. This chapter of Bhagavad Gita is called the King of Education because it is the essence of all doctrines and philosophies explained before. Among the principal philosophers in India are Gautama, Kanad, Kapila, Yajnavalkya, Shandilya, and Vaishvanara. And finally, there is Vyasadeva, the author of the Vedanta Sutra. So there is no dearth of knowledge in the field of philosophy or transcendental knowledge. Now the Lord says that this 9th chapter is the king of all such knowledge, the essence of all knowledge that can be derived from the study of the Vedas and different kinds of philosophy. It is the most confidential because confidential or transcendental knowledge involves understanding the difference between the soul and the body. And the king of all confidential knowledge culminates in devotional service.
Go ahead, please.
Generally, people are not educated in this confidential knowledge. They are educated in external knowledge. As far as ordinary education is concerned, people are involved with so many departments: politics, sociology, physics, chemistry, mathematics, astronomy, engineering, etc. There are so many departments of knowledge all over the world and many huge universities, but there is, unfortunately, no university or educational institution where the science of the spirit soul is instructed. Yet the soul is the most important part of the body. Without the presence of the soul, the body has no value. Still, people are placing great stress on the bodily necessities of life, not caring for the vital soul.
Thank you. This chapter of the Gita, chapter 4, is called Transcendental Knowledge. And the beginning of the chapter, just out of the gate, Krishna says, Raja Vidya Raja Guhyam. It is the king of knowledge and also the most confidential knowledge. Guhyam means secret or confidential. That word is so interesting, confidential, because it's rooted in this word confident. So confidential, or as Prabhupada said here, means also transcendental. Krishna is giving this knowledge because he's confident in his devotee, and the devotee is also confident in Krishna. So it's confidential. There is a degree of trust established between the teacher and the student. Therefore, the teacher is willing and the student is able to exchange higher knowledge than would be ordinarily presented. There's no such requirement when we're talking about there's no such requirement when we're talking about ordinary educational experiences. There is no emotional exchange. There is no moral responsibility on the part of the student or teacher beyond the most fundamental things in a civilized society. The student may or may not be required to be a decent person outside of the class, nor is the professor required to be a decent person outside of the class. What is being exchanged really is a means of livelihood that the teacher is presenting to the student a way to earn money. And that's the contract, and that's sufficient. So one of my godbrothers was a psychology student. And many people study psychology because they want to understand their own angst and their own problems. It's nicknamed mycology for that reason. People studying psychology. And but after 2 years of it, my godbrother went to the professor and said, I'm reading all the books and all the assignments, but I'm just not sure that what I'm reading is true. And the professor said, where in our agreement does it say that what you're learning is true? What I'm teaching you is what you need to know to make a living in this field. So I found that very telling, because in transcendental or confidential knowledge, nothing is taught without evaluation of its truthfulness and reality, especially in this era of fake news, which is so poisonous to our culture. Goebbels, Hitler's propaganda minister, was famously said that if you tell a lie often enough, it will be accepted as truth. So you just lie, and keep lying, then eventually people will say, okay, that's the reality. There was a famous novel written on this, I believe it was New World or 1984, or maybe both of them, where the hero is teaching. It works in the Ministry of Knowledge or Ministry of Information, and regularly gets orders from the government. Okay, change this history. Now all of the new books will be this history. So there's no actual record. It is just whatever the government wants people to think at that particular time. So Spiritual knowledge, transcendental knowledge has nothing to do with acquiring wealth or political control. It is simply given for the sake of helping the recipient and accepted for the sake of self-improvement. Anya bilasita shunyam jnana karmadhyanavritam anukulena krishnanu shilanam bhaktir uttama. Rupa Goswami has defined pure devotional service as devoid of any kind of ulterior motive, such as prospering economically or just getting information for the sake of being knowledgeable. This is the reason why the jnani, who may be very knowledgeable, may have a hard time with bhakti, because the jnani does not want to enter into that trusting relationship with Krishna. The jnani wants to have all the information and then may decide where to place his or her heart, you see. Whereas the bhakta begins by placing confidence in Krishna. And then, as part of his end of the bargain, Krishna gives knowledge from within the heart. Tesham satata yuktanam bhajatam priti purvakam dadami buddhi yogam tam jaina mam upayanti te. Krishna says that for those who constantly worship me with love, I give the understanding by which they can come to me. So in bhakti, there's this presupposition that of confidence. I trust Krishna. I place my confidence in Krishna. And then Krishna, seeing the sincere approach of the devotee, places confidential realizations in the devotee's heart. So this is the loving exchange between the Lord and the devotee. That is the hallmark of devotional service. Therefore, knowledge of bhakti is distinct from just knowledge, empiric knowledge, or even knowledge of the soul. Prabhupada stresses that in this first paragraph, but we're just beginning. So let's continue with the purport. Aritra, if you'd be kind enough to continue.
Yes, Lord. The Bhagavad Gita, especially from the second chapter on, stresses the importance of the soul. In the very beginning, the Lord says that this body is perishable and that the soul is not perishable. Antavanta ime deha nitya shoktaha sharirinaha. That is a confidential part of knowledge. Simply knowing that the spirit soul is different from this body and that its nature is immutable, indestructible, and eternal. But that gives no positive information about the soul. Sometimes people are under the impression that the soul is different from the body and that when the body is finished or one is liberated from the body, the soul remains in a void and becomes impersonal. But actually, that is not the fact. How can the soul, which is so active within this body, be inactive after being liberated from the body? It is always active. If it is eternal, then it is eternally active, and its activities in the spiritual kingdom are the most confidential part of spiritual knowledge. These activities of the spirit soul are therefore indicated here as constituting the king of all knowledge, the most confidential part of knowledge.
Thank you. Isn't that a beautiful point? In this body, the soul is always active. Even when we're asleep, our dreams are happening and all of the bodily functions are going on, the breathing, the pumping of the heart. There's constant activity in this body. I have a little grandson who's 3 months old, and he does not stop moving for a moment. Unless he's dead asleep, but for no purpose, no reason, you're just active, moving. So the impersonalist, or the impersonal idea of the soul, is a part, Prabhupada said, but not a complete understanding of confidential knowledge. Yes, we must understand that we're not the body, that the soul is distinct from the body, but that knowledge is incomplete in and of itself because it does not address what happens to the soul after the death of the body. In general, the soul is thought to enter into a state of non-existence. This is because the impersonalist has the idea that life is suffering. So our topic this morning is happiness, and we're getting to that. But the impersonalist recognizes that the soul, or that this life is full of miseries. The Buddhists, for example, have the Four Noble Truths. The Four Noble Truths of Buddhism are that first, life is suffering. Second, suffering is caused by desire. Third, stop desire and you stop suffering. And fourth, the Eightfold Noble Path for stopping desire. These are the four truths of Buddhism. So the goal of the Buddhist is to amalgamate or to annihilate one's individual existence. The goal of the Shankarites is to annihilate the individual existence through merging into Brahman. In both cases, the idea is that individuality causes suffering. But the Vaishnava knows that there are activities in this world that are going on constantly. So we see the soul is constantly active. How could the soul become inactive if it's eternal? The soul is the eternal part of the body, of one's existence. That much we agree on. But then how can the soul become merged into a void of inactivity after leaving the body, you see? It makes no sense. If Prabhupada's point is so cogent, if the soul is eternal and the soul is active, therefore the soul is eternally active. So confidential knowledge constitutes what are the activities of the soul in the liberated state, in the state of actual liberation. So we'll continue with the purport.
Sure. This knowledge is the purest form of all activities, as explained in Vedic literature. In the Padma Puran, man's sinful activities have been analyzed and are shown to be the results of sin after sin. Those who are engaged in fruitive activities are entangled in different stages and forms of sinful reactions. For instance, when the seed of a particular tree is sown, the tree does not appear immediately to grow. It takes some time. It is first a small sprouting plant, then it assumes the form of a tree, then it flowers and bears fruit. And when it is complete, the flowers and fruits are enjoyed by persons who have sown the seed of the tree. Similarly, a man performs a sinful act, and like a seed, it takes time to fructify. There are different stages. The sinful action may have already stopped within the individual, but the results or the fruit of that sinful action are still to be enjoyed. There are sins which are still in the form of a seed, and there are others which are already fructified and are giving us fruit, which we are enjoying as distress and pain.
Go ahead, please.
As explained in the 28th verse of the 7th chapter, a person who has completely ended the reactions of all sinful activities and who is fully engaged in pious activities, being freed from the duality of this material world, becomes engaged in devotional service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead Krishna. In other words, those who are actually engaged in the devotional service of the Lord, Supreme Lord, are already freed from all reactions.
Thank
The
you.
state-
Okay, we'll carry on in a moment there. So now Prabhupada switches the subject to the causes of distress. And if we're talking about happiness, that's also important to understand, isn't it? So the ordinary sense of life in this world is that our happiness is caused by our own activities, and our distress is caused by forces beyond our control. It is said in the Vedas, Anando Maya Vyasat, that the soul is seeking pleasure by nature. And again, even within this life, we experience this profoundly. All of us have certain ways of finding happiness, and we pursue those things to the best of our ability and enjoy the fruits of our pursuits. And yet in the course of those pursuits, we often experience setbacks and depressing defeats and insurmountable obstacles and things that cause us frustration. this is why in the Gita, Krishna explains that of the 4 types of people who come to him, 2 of them are just out and out suffering, either destitute or desperate. So in this section of the purport, Prabhupada is explaining the cause of these sufferings and setbacks. It is due to the past sinful activities of the eternal soul. The soul has been active, not only in this life, but in past lives. And those activities have brought about reactions that are manifesting in various unwanted and unpleasant ways in our lives, either as physical infirmity or financial distress or legal problems or attacks from other living entities or problems with our own mind or natural disasters that are beyond our power to control. So the sufferings that we undergo are caused by the past activities of the eternal soul. There's a verse that Srila Prabhupada is referring to, chapter 7, verse 28. Desham twantagatam papam jananam punya karmanam te dvandva moha nirmukta bhajanti mam tridavata. Those who have acted piously in past lives and in this life take refuge in me in devotional service. And because of their surrender to Krishna, their past sinful reactions have been reduced or removed. This is, of course, the Mahavakya of the Gita at the end, 1866. Sarvadharmam parichaja mamikam saranam vraja aham tvam sarva papebhyo. I will relieve you, Krishna promises, from all sinful reactions. So those sinful reactions are in different states. Some are fructified and we're experiencing them right now. Some of them are about to fructify anytime, and some of them are still gestating and will fructify in the future. All of that is wiped away for one who takes refuge in Krishna in devotional service. One who shifts one's actions from those which are self-serving to those that are truly selfless. Selfless action is recommended in the Gita as a way to happiness on the material level. And we see this with philanthropists, wealthy people. They've made all the millions and billions of dollars they could ever spend. So they start investing it in philanthropy, in trying to help others, to help the downtrodden, to help suffering people. Why? Because it brings them a degree of happiness and a degree of peace of mind. So this is a more refined form of happiness, yet it's still on the material platform. It has no connection to the source of the wealth which they are now enjoying. Where did that money come from? Where did their prosperity come from? You see, so the devotee understands that Krishna is the source of everything, and therefore becomes truly peaceful and truly happy. Bhoktaram yagyatapasam sarvaloka maheshwaram suridam sarvabhutanam gyatfamam shantim richtati. That the person who sees God as the proprietor of everything, and therefore the bhokta, the legitimate enjoyer of all sacrifices, and the best friend of everyone, becomes peaceful. So this is bringing us to our topic here of happiness in spiritual life. The first prerequisite for understanding or being happy as a human being is recognizing that God owns everything, and that everything therefore is meant for God's service, and that God is not punishing us by setbacks or by sufferings. He is always our best friend. Therefore, whatever's coming our way is from him for his own inscrutable reasons and for our benefit. Feeling like that with our best friend is the key to peace. And without peace, Krishna says earlier in the Gita, what is the question of happiness? If we're not at peace, there's no happiness. So now let's read a little further in Prabhupada's purport. We'll skip this section. Okay.
For those who are engaged.
Oh, do you see the screen? I'm at the top of the page of my screen sharing, if you would, please.
Yes, okay. It is said that the execution of devotional service is so perfect that one can perceive the results directly. This direct result is actually perceived, and we have practical experience that any person who is chanting the holy names of Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, in course of chanting without offenses, feels some transcendental pleasure and very quickly becomes purified of all material contamination. This is actually seen. Furthermore, if one engages not only in hearing but in trying to broadcast the message of devotional activities as well, or if he engages himself in helping the missionary activities of Krishna consciousness, he gradually feels spiritual progress. This advancement in spiritual life does not depend on any kind of previous education or qualification. The method itself is so pure that by simply engaging in it, one becomes pure.
Thank you. Thank you. So here now we're getting to the topic of devotional service. And Srila Prabhupada is commenting that this activity is itself without flaw. We may have flaws, but the process itself is without flaws. If we understand God as a proprietor of everything, and therefore try to offer to the best of our ability some service to him, this is a perfect expression for the activity of the eternal soul. This is the perfect act. This is the perfect action. Even if our offerings have some flaws, even if we vacillate from sometimes offering to God and sometimes not, whatever we do offer is pure and perfect in its essence, and therefore we benefit from it in that way. There is no contamination if our purpose is pleasing God. So the word Prabhupada uses there, this gradual purification, means that the more we associate with this pure activity of devotional service, the more the unwanted desires in our heart become washed out. The example is given of a glass of ink. If you start pouring milk in the ink, it will at first be a very blended mixture. But as long as the milk continues going into that cup and the overflow is getting constantly more milky, eventually it will come to a point where there is no more ink at all in the glass. It is simply milk. So performing service to the Supreme, offering our work as an active devotion to the Supreme, bit by bit washes out all kinds of other desires, that the same desires that have brought about our suffering in the material world. So the process is so pure that even if we are still, as of yet, mixed devotees, the process will lead us to a point of perfect, pure, constant devotion to Lord Krishna. So this is what takes us on to the position of happiness. So we'll continue now, Richard Prabhu, if you would. I'm going to summarize the next part. And we'll get right now to the happiness. Actually, before we read this, I'll just say briefly, Srila Prabhupada gives the example of Narada Muni, who was unfortunately an orphan, or the son of a maidservant, a very humble position in society. But because he and his mother were hosting some great devotees, the child, Narada, was able to take the remnants of their food. And thus, just by this incidental association, an incidental act of devotion, just eating prasad, Narada became so purified as to become a great devotee. So Srila Prabhupada is giving this life of Narada as evidence of how the actions of the activity of devotional service is itself so pure that it can purify the practitioner. Okay, Richard Prabhu, please continue.
The process of devotional service is a very happy one. Susukham. Why? Devotional service consists of Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu. So one can simply hear the chanting of the glories of the Lord, or can attend philosophical lectures on transcendental knowledge given by authorized acharyas. Simply by sitting, one can learn. Then one can eat the remnants of the food offered to God. nice palatable dishes. In every state, devotional service is joyful. One can execute devotional service even in the most poverty-stricken condition. The Lord says, Patram Pushpam Phalam Toyam. He's ready to accept from the devotee any kind of offering, never mind what. Even a leaf, a flower, a bit of fruit, or a little water, which are all available in every part of the world, can be offered by any person, regardless of social position, and will be accepted if offered with love. There are many instances in history. Simply by tasting the tulasi leaves offered to the lotus feet of the Lord, great sages like Sanat Kumar became great devotees. Therefore, the devotional process is very nice and it can be executed in a happy mood. God accepts only the love with which things are offered to Him.
Very nice.
It is said,
I'm going to just comment here for a moment. Excuse me. I love this paragraph where Srila Prabhupada says that any person, any poor person anywhere in the world can find these things. They're sequentially listed, Patram, Pushpam, Palam, Toyam. The Patram comes in the spring. The deciduous tree first sprouts leaves in the beginning of the warm season. And then Pushpa, then comes the flower in the summertime. And then in the fall, Palam, the flower turns into a fruit, having attracted the pollinating bees. So then the tree bears its fruit. And then in the winter, when the tree loses its leaves, there is always some water available, even if one has to melt snow. So no one has any excuse to say, I have nothing to offer to God. He's quite content to accept these very simple offerings. And not only content, but delighted. Not only delighted, but he's hankering to have these reciprocations with his parts and parcels. So this process of bhakti and devotional service, the activity of the soul that brings one to happiness, is not restricted by any kind of external situation. We are entangled in this body, in this social strata, in this economic situation, in this life. So many entanglements, so many complications. Nobody can escape them, even the most renounced person. So these entanglements affect us all. And it is our choice whether to just suffer with them or turn our attention to what we can do, even in the face of so many complications. And what we can do is never restricted by any sort of material difficulty. We can offer these simple items to the Lord. We can chant the holy names of Krishna. Those things cannot be taken from us or restricted in any way. Even though these heroic devotees in Russia who were imprisoned for their religious beliefs and subjected to all kinds of psychological torture, they continued chanting. It made them take more shelter, actually, of Krishna, not less, as their tormentors had hoped. Sukha. See, this is not only sukha, happiness, but susukha, great happiness which cannot be taken away from us by or overshadowed by any of the sufferings and complications of our lives. In the process of bhakti, therefore, the first thing we need to know if we want to find happiness in bhakti is that no material situation can actually prohibit us from enjoying the pleasure of serving Krishna. We need to become a little more convinced, that's all. In the 5th chapter of the Gita, Krishna says, Yehi samsparshaja bhoga, dukkha yonaya evate. That the pleasures of the senses, the material pleasures to which we have been so long addicted, all have this one thing in common, advanta. They are coming and going. And therefore, they are not sources of pleasure, but actually sources of misery. We get what we want, but then we don't. Then it doesn't meet our needs, or we want something else due to the mode of passion. So, advanta kontaya, not teshu ramate buddha. Therefore, a Buddha, an intelligent person, does not take part in them. So this is one way to address our challenges of happiness in Krishna consciousness. Are we taking excessive shelter of the material pleasures? Are we turning our attention from the happiness derived from serving Krishna to some kind of ordinary, meaningless sense gratification? That could mean eating food which has not been offered to Krishna. That could mean just spacing out in front of the television. That could mean mindlessly playing video games. What to speak of pleasures which transgress the regulative principles. Those are very undermining to our hopes of experiencing spiritual happiness. But even within the boundaries of regulative principles, we have attachments. So finding the balance of having a little bit of sense gratification, but without going excessively in that direction. This is key to being happy in Krishna consciousness. Srila Prabhupada said that sense gratification is like salt. There needs to be a little bit in the preparation, but if you put too much in, it will ruin it. So due to an impersonal disposition, we sometimes think that happiness in Krishna consciousness will only come if we're totally renounced, 100%. But we are entangled in all kinds of material responsibilities. Do you recognize this consciousness? Isn't this exactly what Arjuna said of the Bhagavad Gita? I don't want to deal with my responsibilities. I want to go away. And they're too troublesome. So the whole Gita is Krishna convincing Arjuna why he has to deal with his responsibilities, but rather dealing with them, not for the sake of sense enjoyment, but for the sake of pleasing Krishna. So herein lies the secret to happiness in Krishna consciousness, the balance between meeting our material needs, our interests, our requirements in such a way that it maximizes our facility to perform devotional service. In Arjuna's case, Krishna wanted him to fight in the battle. In our case, does Krishna want us to go to the job? Does Krishna want us to raise our family? Does Krishna want us to deal with whatever our material requirements are? Well, if we have taken the vow that our purpose in life, or taken the strategy that our means of finding happiness is pleasing Krishna, then the answer is yes. We can offer whatever we do to Krishna. In my work at the Krishna House in Gainesville, I'm dealing with students all the time who really don't like school that much. And I'm saying, this is your service for Krishna. And they say, but it doesn't feel like my service to Krishna. And I don't particularly like doing it. How is it connected to Krishna? How will I know? Well, I can't go back and retrace all the steps of your life that have led you to this point where your responsibilities are in academia. But I can say that you have them. They're not destructive. They're not going to stop you from your devotional service. So therefore, why not just take them, meet your responsibilities, and move on? See, this can be extrapolated to any situation in life, whether it's a family situation, an economic situation, a business or employment situation. You're in this situation. However you got in it is not really relevant. From this position, how can you offer to Krishna? So in the Gita, Krishna says that one must be balanced. Yukta hara biharasya yukta chetasya karmashi. The word is yukta, which means temperate. It means balanced. So temperate in four things to survive in devotional service in this world: eating, sleeping, work, and recreation. So being balanced in eating and sleeping obviously means that we get enough rest, we get enough prasadam, but not too much of either, just what needed to keep body and soul together. In terms of work, as we were discussing, the soul has to be active. It is eternally active. Therefore, if we have some work, whatever work we have to do, whether it's as a housewife or a businessman or whatever profession we may find ourselves in. We need to do that work for Krishna. How do we do it for Krishna? Well, at the very least, we offer some fruits from our work to Krishna's service. We use the revenue from our job to pay for a house where we can live and establish an altar and offer puja to Krishna. We create enough free time through our profession that we can go and volunteer time at this temple for Krishna, or go out and share Krishna consciousness with other people. In this way, our work is connected to our devotional service. If we understand that our purpose is devotional service and the work is the means for doing it. Srila Prabhupada said that of his father. He said his real business was bhajan, but he sold cloth just to meet his external responsibilities. But his real business, his heart and soul, was in bhajan. So in the same way, happiness is found if we put our Krishna consciousness at the very top of our priority list, and we see all the other things in our lives as related to and supportive of that overarching sublime goal, the thing that really brings us happiness. And again, in the course of that, note that Krishna says recreation is also needed. So we do our work, but we also need recreation. And recreation can take many forms. It is not patently inappropriate to watch a movie or to play a video game or to do something that is relaxing to our minds. If we're doing that for the purpose of letting ourselves lie fallow for a little bit so that we can proceed in our devotional service. As we get more and more taste for service, and Krishna rewards us with more and more intimate and ecstatic kinds of service, then the taste for these other things becomes less. There's also recreation that is much more constructive, such as gardening or various kinds of exercise. These are things that enrich our lives and our minds in more constructive ways. But my point is something besides work and puja, something that is attractive to us and engages us and relaxes us and creates some variety of life. So these four things, Krishna says, if you're balanced in eating, sleeping, work, and recreation, you can conquer all the miseries of material life. This is the formula, the other part of the formula towards happiness. So we're going to just now finish this purport, and then we'll have some more discussion.
As will be seen in Bhagavad Gita, actual devotional service begins after liberation. After one is liberated, when one is situated in the Brahman position, Brahma Bhuta, one's devotional service begins. Tama sarveshu bhuteshu mad bhaktim labate param. No one can understand the Supreme Personality of Godhead by executing Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga, Ashtanga Yoga, or any other yoga independently. By these yogic methods, one may make a little progress toward Bhakti Yoga, but without coming to the stage of devotional service, one cannot understand what is the personality of Godhead. In the Srimad Bhagavatam, it is also confirmed that when one becomes purified by executing the process of devotional service, especially by hearing Srimad Bhagavatam or Bhagavad Gita from realized souls, then he can understand the science of Krishna or the science of God. Evam prasanna manaso bhagavad bhakti yogataha. When one's heart is cleared of all nonsense, then one can understand what God is. Thus, the process of devotional service of Krishna consciousness is the king of all education and the king of all confidential knowledge. It is the purest form of religion, and it can be executed joyfully without difficulty. Therefore, one should adopt it.
Wow. Prabhupada's got so much conviction, huh? Like when he was asked, are you happy? Yes. So we should adopt it. But there's all kinds of rationale behind our adoption of devotional service. I just wanted to conclude by talking about this word, pratyaksha. Pratyaksha means direct experience. The happiness that devotees feel is completely unknown to the non-devotees. They cannot fathom it. They cannot understand what could possibly motivate a person to rise early in the morning, to make sacrifices of time and treasure for the purpose of serving an abstract idea of God from their point of view. But for the devotee, the happiness derived from the activities of devotional service is so intense that it's very easy to set aside lower forms of happiness. It's not difficult at all. For example, following regulative principles, this concept was presented to the Marquis of Zetland, the governor of India, who asked one of Prabhupada's godbrothers, "Can you make me a Brahmin?" He said, "Yes, you just have to follow these four regulative principles. We can do it." And the Marquis said, "I would rather die than live a life so much in the mode of goodness." So in the Srimad Bhagavatam, Shukadeva Goswami explains that by practicing the regulative principles, as Krishna calls them, the regulative principles of freedom, then one comes to the mode of goodness, and the influence of lust and greed fall away. And then, as was quoted in this last verse in the last chapter, paragraph in the purport, Evam prasana manaso, having come to the mode of goodness, then one's mind becomes enlivened by devotional service. So the experience that we are having in Krishna consciousness is just so rare and special. We are very blessed to be able to realize the pleasure that is available in devotional service. And now we are challenged how to find the ways that we can sustain that pleasure throughout the rest of our lives. So from this purport, we get several secrets. First, that it needs to be understood philosophically. People often think that we are sentimentalists or just dry renunciates. My father used to say to me, "Can you eat this? Can you eat this?" And I would try to explain, "Dad, I could eat whatever I like as long as it's been offered to Krishna." And Krishna has his dietary preferences. So he could never really understand. But the point is that without experiencing the bliss of devotional service, pratyaksha, no one can understand. But we can validate our point, our position so thoroughly from the philosophy of the Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam and other Vedic literatures. There is no question of it being just a sentimental fad or some kind of mind control or brainwashing where somebody else has convinced us that if we do all these unpleasant things, we'll be happy. We are experiencing that happiness. So to treasure it means to minimize our material distractions, to dovetail or engage all of our material responsibilities in Krishna's service, and to give whatever we can as often as we can for the pleasure of the Lord. When Krishna is pleased, we will be pleased, just as the servant in the palace lives on the same standard as the king, even though their positions are very different. So in the same way, if Krishna is pleased, we are enjoying on the platform of bhakti, and we're enjoying like Krishna because he's giving us that pleasure. Prabhupada was once asked, "How do you know when Krishna is pleased?" He said, "When you see Krishna smile." So we could similarly understand that when we are feeling enlivened by some service, then Krishna is enjoying that service. He is reciprocating in this nitya yukta upasate, this eternal blissful exchange of loving service. The devotee wants to serve Krishna, and then Krishna is pleased with that service, and Krishna gives pleasure to the devotee and pleases the devotee in various ways. And being so pleased by the Lord, the devotee wants to give more service, to which the Lord reciprocates with more pleasure and more service opportunities. So this goes on not only in this life, in this miserable material world, but on into the future of our spiritual existence. And this is why devotees can meet the miseries of death, the most frightening of all, with such aplomb and such neutrality. One of my godbrothers just passed away from cancer last month. And I spoke to him not long before he died. And he was so much at peace and so content and so prepared. He was smiling and he was peaceful and he was managing it with amazing equanimity. So devotees are really good at this. We're good at two things. We're good at cooking and dying. You know, we are really expert in these two fields. Nobody can beat us. So happiness is found in our lives when we realize the main problems are dealt with. That is death and rebirth. We've dealt with them. We can be peaceful. Now we just every day do as much as we can for Krishna, experience the joy of Krishna's reciprocation, and minimize those other pursuits of pleasure that were actually sources of our suffering in the first place. So I will stop there. Thank you very much for your kind attention. Now, if there's any discussion, please feel free and unmute, and we can just chew over these subjects a little further. Any reflections on these points? How does it relate to your life? What did you find helpful? What questions did you have about these points?
So may I ask a question, Prabhuji?
Please, of course, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna. Thank you so much, Prabhuji, for enlightening us on this topic. I was very, very curious to know more about it. And my question is about, so I know my own journey. I had the opportunity to associate with devotees whose lives I had a glimpse into. I could look into their lives. And I thought that let me try and ape them. In the beginning, let me try and copy them. Let's see what happens. But a lot of times we will come across people whom we are trying to preach, and they will tend to look, as you just mentioned about your own father, they will tend to have a view that it's a bunch of rules that you need. Spiritual life is about a bunch of rules that you need to follow.
Yes.
So what kind of glimpse can we offer to them, like in a brief conversation? You know, if we are not so fortunate, if they're not so fortunate to get sustained association, what kind of glimpse can you offer?
That's a very, very good question, Richard Prabhu. And thank you, by the way, for helping me through the class. So the best means, if it's a brief conversation, is to share a book with them. There is a better chance they will understand if we only have a brief interaction, if they have that book in their hand. Maybe even very few will actually get it, but some will. But if this is a coworker or a neighbor or somebody with whom you have an extended association, a better strategy is to just be the change, as Gandhi said, be the change you want to see in this world. That is, in other words, our own happiness will shine through. There's a saying that if you build a better mousetrap, the whole world will beat a path to your door, right? So if somebody is actually happy and on a very deep level, having dealt with life's major problems, that will come across in a subtle way to those around you. And it is fine to have like ordinary conversations with people. We should understand that we're not making some huge offense to Krishna if we have an ordinary conversation with somebody where we don't mention Krishna. See? And we can just be interested in them as people and understanding them and know about their lives and show a genuine interest and compassion towards them. This will attract people to try to understand, okay, how has this person got such a deep level of satisfaction? So if it's a short-term or long-term relationship, there's different strategies. But as we read about the Goswamis in Vrindavan, Dhira Dhira Jana Priyo, they were dear to everyone, both the gentle and the ruffians. So this means that the devotee has this ability of equal vision and dealing with people in an equitable way. If people are not interested, it's actually going to hurt our spiritual life to try to impose it on them. So we're much better showing by example than precept if the person is not actually interested. It may take years, so we have to be very patient. But if we are consistent and through the ups and downs of our lives, we remain equipoised, people will see that and they'll understand. They'll become curious. They'll want to know, what is your secret? You see?
Thank you, Prabhuji. Thank you.
Yeah, you mentioned aping the people that you met initially. This is another point, just briefly, that, yeah, we cannot express our devotion to Krishna in the way another person does. Krishna mentions this in the 3rd chapter of the Gita. Better to do your own duty imperfectly than somebody else's perfectly. So if we compare ourselves to others, even other devotees, we'll either become puffed up or we'll become frustrated. We have our own unique, satisfying relationship with Krishna. Self-realization means to uncover that and find out what it is. And mine is not going to look like yours or anybody else's. We each have our own individual, distinct, unique way of pleasing Krishna. So the tendency to judge ourselves is a symptom of the mode of passion. We want to push ourselves to more and more and more accomplishment and elevation. And this is not an offering to Krishna. This is an expression of false ego. An offering to Krishna is just being ourselves and offering who we are to Krishna. Okay?
I needed to hear that part of the answer. Thank you for rectifying that things, because over a period of time, I have come to realize that I had that problem as well.
All of us.
That's like the bar that you set for yourself. And that's
Yes.
always going to be very congenial.
Yes, when in fact, Krishna's not interested in how high we can jump. He's just interested, do we offer him a fruit or a flower? And do we do it from our heart? You know?
Thank you so much.
Yes, other comments?
Haribol Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Haribol, good to see you.
Haribol, I'm not driving, just so you know, my car's parked.
Okay, yeah, I was wondering.
Yeah, thank you so much for the really encouraging talk about balance and finding that in our lives. My question is, sometimes it feels like when we're in the mood of service and we're wanting to do something, it feels like we have to channel the mode of passion to get it done, like an active sort of adrenaline or activity. So I'm wondering how can we work from the place of the mode of passion for Krishna without then losing the balance? Because I feel like balance is mode of goodness. So how do those two things work together?
Yeah, passion can be dovetailed in Krishna's service. And sometimes it has to be. Just like Arjuna could not fight without, you can't fight without passion. So that was his particular duty. So it really depends on our nature and our service. But at some point in all of our lives, we have to be passionate in our service to Krishna. For example, if you've got a term paper and it's due tomorrow, I mean, you have to do it no matter what it takes, right? Mode of goodness means also planning and preparation so that we, as much as possible, avoid putting ourselves in situations where the mode of passion is necessary. If we have prepared for our lives, we understand our responsibilities, it's easier to minimize the need for passionate activity. But even if it's passionate, it's still devotional service. In the 3rd canto, Kapila Dev discusses with Devahuti about devotional service in the modes of nature. Have you read that section? It's a very interesting section. So there is devotional service in the mode of passion. But if it's dominant, then what happens is we become competitive with other devotees, or we become separate from other devotees. This is also the influence of ignorance, devotional service in the mode of ignorance. So as that verse we mentioned earlier, evam prasana manaso, coming to the mode of goodness means we become more and more, or less and less influenced, let's put it that way, by passion. But passion can and must be used in Krishna's service according to the situation. You know, there were times when Srila Prabhupada acted in a passionate way. He he insisted the devotees publish 17 volumes in 2 months. It's pretty passionate. The BBT manager had said, Prabhupada, we're going to get up to 1 book every month. Prabhupada said, no, you must finish 17 in 2 months. And they did it. And they did it. And he participated, he pushed. So passion can be used in Krishna service. The idea is, though, if we are able to minimize it, that's good. You know, Shyamala Kishore Prabhu, with age, this tends to come. One of our resources in youth is a lot of energy. And so we might tend to depend on it. Okay, well, I can, I see this thing is coming, but I know I'm going to be able to handle it. I'll just push myself a little bit. As we age, we lose that resource. And so we're forced to either do less and less or plan more and more, you see. So that's why, for example, we read about the life of Bhaktivinoda Thakur. He did so much. I was just hearing the other day about his routine, his schedule. Madhumati was speaking about it in our class on Friday. And he would produce so many books and still do his service as a magistrate. And he did all these things and take care of his family with 13 children, you know, some huge amounts of family responsibilities as well. He met all his duties by his regulation. So as we age and as we mature in devotional service, we just become more and more able to understand our priorities, to set aside the non-essential things, to focus our attention on the essential things and plan and do them in a regular way. That's the best way I could answer your question. Not be afraid of passion, but minimize its influence.
Thank you. That's really helpful.
Okay, good to see you. I hope, do you know everybody? Everybody know you? Shyamala Kishore is one of our esteemed Krishna House alumni.
Yes, Prabhuji. In fact, she took class maybe 1 or 2 times, I believe.
Oh, very good. Very nice. I think we're hearing from you on Tuesday this week also, Shyamala Kishore, right, Prabhu?
Yes.
Okay,
Thank you.
at Gainesville. Thank you. Other comments or questions?
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Thank you so much. I really, just one reflection and one question. I really liked your analogy of the 4 seasons. Really, I've never heard that before. The 4 seasons to Patram Phalam Pushpam Toyam. And I was just thinking that also applies to the 4 seasons of our life. No matter what situation we are in, we will have something to offer to Krishna. So that was very nice. Thank you so much for providing that insight. And you know, in the beginning of the class, you spoke about the king of knowledge and the confidential knowledge, and you compared that with material knowledge, right? But somehow I'm speaking for myself. In the beginning, before I came into Krishna consciousness, the society, our family, everybody pushes into material knowledge, right? And that's okay. That's considered to be perfect. And when we move into Krishna consciousness, it's not so important for many people around us. And when we try to preach to people, this is not something that they imbibe, even though it is the king of knowledge and the most confidential. And you also mentioned about how it's not true material knowledge. But why is it that we gravitate towards that as opposed to this, which is far more important?
Yes. Well, it isn't necessarily untrue material knowledge. It's just incomplete. It's out of context. There was a history professor at the University of Florida who wrote a book about, after he retired, about how religion and spirituality and character development had been divorced from the educational experience in the secular university. Of course, this is because of the government wanting to keep arm's length from religion, so as not to impose any religion on the people in this country, at least in the Western world. So the use of one's brain for vocational purposes is suitable for many people. And it's a way of life that affords certain advantages. It may be less physically demanding. It may be better compensated. It may provide over time more flexibility, just as you were saying in the seasons of life, a very nice reflection. How in our later years, if we have been responsible and frugal, we can have sufficient income and resources to give our time more completely to our puja. And so is that a reasonable strategy? Yes, of course. Does that mean that the knowledge that we acquire in college is useful? Absolutely, can totally be used in Krishna's service. And yet we read Prabhupada describing the modern educational system as a slaughterhouse.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes people misconstrue that to mean that it's all bad. But that's a very immature understanding of the philosophy. It just means that if it is not engaged in Krishna's service, it is not complete in and of itself. So we can have many very educated people, highly accomplished in their fields, whose character is undeveloped and whose degree of happiness in life is stunted because of the unbalanced education that did not provide them any spiritual nourishment and perspective. So our Krishna consciousness point is that put the first thing in first, the most important thing in first. That is, our spiritual education should be our priority at every stage of life. And then accordingly, we can pursue our vocation, whether it demands our physical being or our mental being, to meet our responsibilities in this world. So there's nothing wrong with education. It's just like a knife can be used by a surgeon or by a thief. Same instrument, entirely different purposes. See? So when I hear devotees demeaning education, I find that immature. It's just taking one piece of the philosophy, but not the whole thing. So neither we should think education is going to solve all our problems, nor should we think it is inherently wicked and evil.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But the problem is that when we think that is everything, right? That is the ultimate, and I don't have time for anything else, which we often hear. You know, I don't have time for this, or I don't believe in it, or
yes,
yeah. So
yes, yeah. It's most people in this world are not going to be interested in Krishna consciousness. That's just the reality in this world. So the first and foremost responsibility is for our own spiritual growth. People may like it or they may not like it. They may inquire about it, like I was speaking with Aritra, or they may never recognize our own spiritual growth. That is their relationship with Krishna, and we may not have the power to interfere with it. But if our relationship grows, one thing I can tell you, if our relationship with Krishna grows in the course of our lives, the ability we have to influence others will increase. It is frustrating when we see otherwise intelligent people wasting their lives in sense gratification, right? It's frustrating, but we may not have the potency to change it. We can pray for them. We can do our best to share Krishna consciousness with them. But in the final analysis, our own Krishna consciousness is the only thing that will really matter. And if Krishna allows us to touch them, well, that is Krishna's mercy. And even if they never appreciate what we have to teach them, if they just think of us as in a warm way, this person was my friend, they are benefited enormously. So there's no reason to be discouraged by these pin-headed intellectuals. See, we don't have to be afraid of them. They look at us as fanatics with no reason and rationale, when in fact they are the ones who are fanatics for sense gratification with no reason or rationale, just mindlessly thinking that sense enjoyment will bring them pleasure and not recognizing the obvious fact that their ability to enjoy it will be finished. So they have no rationale, but they accuse us of having no rationale. It's a tough life to be a devotee in the material world. It's said, it is folly to be wise in a fool's paradise. And yet, what is the alternative? So, all right, I think we are about out of time. Thank you very much. Very nice question.
I think Chaitanya Bhavadas, he has raised his hand. I don't know, Prabhu, you have any question, Prabhuji? Chaitanya Bhavadas.
I do, but I don't know if we have time.
I have time if you do. I just don't want to burn you out.
Okay, Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Haribo.
Prabhu, my question was regarding the point of happiness. I'm sorry if my camera is not good. This is a really battered phone. So, so as this verse mentioned, and you also mentioned that devotional service, it does provide happiness. It's a very happiness-filled process. But and we see as we engage in some little preaching that some people, they do get they are able to experience that happiness when they first come into Krishna consciousness. For whatever reason, they just can, it's very palpable. But in some cases we see that after a while that happiness, that which is just there, it doesn't last on its own. So could you speak on some things that we can do that may help them to sustain when this initial offering of happiness, which is just freely just given, kind of runs out?
Okay, very good question. This is explained in the Nectar of Devotion, that devotional service has various symptoms. And one of them is the immediate relief of material distress and the immediate experience of transcendental happiness. So people can experience that almost at once. So this is the lack of sustainability is caused by a lack of knowledge and understanding of the process and excessive addiction to non-devotional activities. These two things undermine our progress. So we need to have, the intellectual understanding is available. We need to avail ourselves of it. And if we're feeling weak spiritually and the happiness is not there, we need to read more or have more classes and more association, because there is a process here. And as we were discussing, it's not extremely difficult to learn. It's not as hard as computer programming. Anyone can learn it, but it is a learning curve. And if people get the bliss and then they don't want to go through the learning curve, what can be said? But we are not without an answer for that question. You have to learn more and understand how it all works if you're expecting the same result to continue. As far as sense gratification, yes, the example is given of a pot with a crack in the water, in the bottom. You can fill it and fill it, but the water will keep draining out. So if you want the happiness to remain with you, then you need to cut off the things that are causing it to leak out. The most important are the regulative principles. If people are enjoying some bhakti, but then they're unsteady, then the question is, are you following the regulative principles? If you want to hold this happiness and keep it in your heart at all times, then follow these 4 principles. That's all. Tobacco and tea and onions can be very hard for people to give up. They would rather trade their Krishna conscious happiness for tobacco. Tea. Tobacco's got to go. Tea, let it go a little long. Onions, a little longer. You're not going to fail in your Krishna consciousness because you're attached to onions. But when you get to a point where you want to go further, you have to give them up. Okay? I knew a man who said, I know your 4 regulative principles: no meat, no fish, no eggs, and no onions. So not quite. So these are the two ways to give. We can encourage people who are very new to take baby steps. Okay, stop eating meat. Okay, that will help you retain your bliss in Krishna consciousness. Never mind the onions, that can come later. So there's a nice verse by Rupa Goswami that says that Yena Tena Prakarina, Mana Krishna Naveshyat. Somehow or other think about Krishna, the rules can come later. So there's an initial offering, like sometimes like streaming services say 1 week free. So you get an initial offering of bliss, but then you have to pay. So Krishna consciousness is a little bit like that. Yes, there's an initial free offering of transcendental bliss just from a little devotional service. But then we need to offer a little more because Krishna is not so cheap. See, he'll give us that special introductory offer, and then we need to understand more and control our senses more if we want to deepen and enhance that enjoyment. Good question, Prabhu. Thank you. Haribol.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Hare
Hare
Krishna,
Krishna. Thanks
Prabhu.
for.
Oh,
Wonderful class, and I'm very, very happy that you were able to come now and speak to us, and hopefully, this can become a regular for all of us. And you'll be speaking about happiness, and then, I can feel the happiness myself when I'm associating at the temple with the Krishna's devotees. They're all happy and fired up and charged up and continuing on their devotional service and activities. So I don't know how they're doing it, but it's something definitely coming from your mercy and your guidance. So, yeah, Prabhu, one question I had earlier in your class, you mentioned about the incidental opportunity of serving a Vaishnava, or Narad Muni example you gave, or eating prasadam, and you get into the line of receiving bhakti. And sometimes I have this discussion mostly with the Indian community, with who will not really accept the studying of Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita. Oh, if prasadam is enough for me, I'm vegetarian, I'll eat prasadam, and Narad Muni got elevated, so I can also get through these things. So, and how much they will always say, I know. All the answers you ask them will say, I know. This I know things going on. So, and I do have difficulties because, we say, yeah, eat prasadam, but is that all? Is it okay to eat this prasadam? You can make it happen? Or what I want to know is that I think since all of us devotees are spending so much time doing our sadhana and scrutinizing, studying the Shastras, I think this does play an essential part, because we cannot be so lucky all the time to get an incidental opportunity of taking prasadam or having a Vaishnava come, pure Vaishnava come across your way, and you get bhakti from them. So that's what I wanted to check on you.
Very nice point, Prabhu. So there are 3 types of liberated persons. There's the Nitya Siddha, Sadhana Siddha, and Kripa Siddha. So the Nitya Siddha comes to this world like Srila Prabhupada, already a liberated soul, eternal servant of Krishna, coming to deliver others. The Sadhana Siddha, by diligent practice of devotional service, becomes purified to the point of being able to love Krishna without reservation. And then the Kripa Siddha gets the mercy. So it's compared to an honorary degree at college. You may get an honorary degree. That is a process by which some people get a college certificate, their degree, but it's very rare. And the ordinary path to get the college degree is to diligently do the work. So it's very common that people want the cheapest. They want the most from the least contribution. This is the Vaishya mentality, right? It's a combination of ignorance and passion. Okay, yes, I recognize I need to give to Krishna, so let me give the least and then take the most. People like that really enjoy the Sudama Leela, right?
Yes.
Very popular. Yeah. So and your question is really good. Well, okay, I'm eating prasadam. Do I have to do more? Why should I worry about all these other things? Isn't that sufficient? It is sufficient. But it's said that of those to whom much is given, much is expected. So if we're a little bit greedy for Krishna's mercy, then the price for that mercy is more shraddha. It's more faith. And faith comes from more reciprocation, from more submission and more reciprocation. So you could say it like this: this person who takes prasadam has a 5% capacity to absorb Krishna's mercy. But a devotee who's doing sadhana and is doing serious service, like trying to share Krishna with others and reading deeply in the books, this person has 90% ability or 60% ability to absorb Krishna's mercy. That's really what drives us. As we age and we progress, we more and more know how to be receptive to and capable of absorbing Krishna Kripa. So ultimately, Nitya Siddha, Sadhana Siddha, and Kripa Siddha, they're all Siddha. So how we get it, how we get that mercy is really up to us. We have the ladder and the steps to take for Sadhana Siddha. So we take those steps and life gets sweeter with age. That person who's trying to give the least, his life does not get sweeter with age. You get more and more, there's still the anxiety. Have I done enough? I just have to end with this little joke. I love this joke. There was a miser who was just rude to everybody and exploited everybody his whole life and piled up huge amounts of money. And he was getting older and he started thinking, okay, well, maybe God exists. So he went into the church, he sat in a sermon, and he put in $5 to the collection plate, just in case. Shortly after that, he died. He ascended to heaven, and there was the angel meeting him at the gate. What are you doing here? He said, I put my $5 in the collection plate. Angel said, wait a minute, I have to check my records. Then he came back and said, here's your $5. Take your lousy $5 and go to hell.
So you thought you would make the best from the $5 that he gave. Oh my gosh.
Fortunately, Krishna is not like that. Even if we do
mentality.
But
and I like the way you made the analysis of, you're making progress from 5% to a 90%, how much you're giving based on that. So these things make people think a lot about that. Explaining. So thank you, Prabhuji, for your wonderful response to this question.
All right, Prabhu. So good to have your association, everyone. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
His Grace Kalakantha Prabhu ki jai.
Prabhupada ki jai.
Kalpatarubhyasya kripa sindhubhyev cha patitanam pavnebhyo vaishnavibhyo namo namah.